Once we figure out what your total protected assets are, let's say the most you can protect besides the house and the car is $122,900, you deduct that from your countable resources, and you're going to figure out what your exposure is. What the state will say, and they call it the spend down. What's the spend down amount? It's shown on that page 15. What's the spend down amount? The state will tell you that's what you have to spend on nursing home costs before they will start paying benefits. Okay? That worksheet, that example in the report, tells you everything that the state will tell you that you get to protect. I'm here to tell you, you get to protect more. Your exposure is your spend down. Your spend down is what the state will tell you after what they tell you can protect. That's what you have to spend on nursing home before they will start paying benefits for nursing home. The term spend in spend down has a broader application than using it to pay for nursing home. That's where effective planning, either on a crisis basis or an advanced proactive approach, can be very helpful for you to determine, do you want to preserve something for yourself for better quality of care, for a spouse, or for your kids? You have to decide your why and your objectives and what's important to you. When you do that, we tell you how you can accomplish that. And there are different ways it can be done, and they're not all that easy. So I just want to share with you how that process works. Now, we get to, I'm still going to answer the question about the house. We get to the issue of the look-back period. The state will also ask you on the application if you've given any assets, accounts, money, anything to anybody for less than value. You didn't sell your car and got the full value for it. You undersold a pickup truck that's worth $45,000 to your son for $5,000. That's underselling. You gave money in an account. You gave monthly payments or quarterly payments. You gave a rental property, whatever. They're going to ask, what have you given away or transferred for less than full value? There's a presumption that if you give money away within that 5 years, that you're doing so with the intent to spend your assets down so you can qualify for benefits under Medicaid. That's the presumption. You can overcome that presumption. Can you give Christmas gifts? Sure you can. Birthday gifts? Sure you can. Modest amounts. There's no magic number. I would say if you're giving away $1,000 or less per year on birthdays and Christmas or holidays, you're probably okay. If you're giving away $14,000 a year to 5, 6, 7 people, you're going to run into problems. And they're going to have a penalty period. And in the situation that Ben explained, some of the siblings held the money. Some of the strategies that we use when it comes to crisis planning in particular, we're going to use gifting. We're going to recommend gifting. And we're going to know exactly what the penalty period will be. We know that. We calculate that. We do it with the intent to trigger a penalty period. And we calculate that very specifically and precisely. But we also figure out how to pay for it, the penalty period. That's part of the plan. So we can preserve some assets to the next generation. Not all of them, but some of them, and then figure out how to pay for the penalty. But we don't do it willy-nilly, and we don't do it with some expertise and some good resources. Here's some things that you can do, and you should do with the assistance of some professional advisor. I call these not too tricky. Your house is exempt if your equity is no more than $560,000. For most people, that's going to be no problem. You can make renovations to that house. You can spend money out of your account, bank account, investment accounts. You can shift money and make upgrades or renovations. Widen the doorways, handicap bathrooms, handrails, all the ramps, all those things. You can do that. No problem. Doesn't matter when. As long as your equity in your house doesn't exceed $560,000, not going to be a problem. You can purchase a new home if you upgrade. If your home is worth $120,000 and you want to go to a $220,000 home or anything like that, no problem. Even within 5 years. You can take cash out of your banks or money out of your investment account, sell other assets, and buy a bigger house. No problem. As long as you don't exceed that cap of $560,000. Now that becomes questionable if you're unmarried. Remember, the intent to return home, the ability to return home, but but you can still do it. You can purchase new appliances and furniture, clothes. You can do those things. I like to say you can't go out and buy a brand new Monet, not brand new, but an original Monet, and put it on your wall and say personal property. The state isn't going to approve that. The state's going to say that's an investment asset. You can't abuse it, but you have a lot of latitude. You can upgrade the primary vehicle. If you're driving a vehicle that's worth $5,000, $10,000, $12,000, $15,000, it's not a problem to buy a new vehicle. Cadillac, pickup truck. I've seen Yukons for $70,000. Can you imagine $70,000 for a vehicle? We've seen conversion vans, as long as you can justify it. I really like the Mercedes Sprinter conversion vans. Have you seen those? For Lisa and me to travel. I really like that. I can't hardly afford it, but I really like it. But you may, if you're in a facility and your family wants to transport you to appointments and family gatherings and weekends, as long as you can justify it, it's okay. That doesn't mean go out and buy your dad a brand new Maserati sports car for $300,000. But if you can justify it, it's probably going to be okay. Expenses. You may have heard this. If you have an irrevocable burial contract, either an insurance policy or a prepaid plan with a funeral home, the state will automatically give you $10,000 per spouse. It might cost you more, and if you can justify it, you might be able to get away with more, but $10,000 is the number. My mother's funeral, even though she had the burial plots already purchased, her funeral in Virginia, very simple, $9,200, $9,300. Now, if you do cremation, it's less expensive. A little bit, not a lot. But anyway, remember what I said before. Consider that spend, quote unquote, in spend down is broader than paying for a nursing home. It includes transfers or conversions of assets that are countable, converting them to non-countable. These are some examples of non-countable appropriate expenditures, even when they're going into nursing homes, regardless of the 5-year look-back period. Now, this is the stuff on the next slide where you better get some help. These are advanced strategies and requires guidance. There may be somebody who's recognized by Medicaid who can receive. If you have a child who is blind or disabled, you can make transfers all day long into a trust or for their benefit, even on the eve of going into nursing home. You may have that situation. Now, here's another one that we use frequently, and is to convert assets. This is usually done, it's always done in the crisis planning, not the advanced planning. And so that means this will not be effective if we're trying to deal with something more than 5 years out. There are reasons why. That's part of the how that I'm not going to explain today. But let me just address it this way. You can convert assets. That could be cash. That could be retirement assets, IRA, something like that. Take it off your balance sheet. It's no longer a countable resource. And it's turned into an income stream known as an annuity. And an annuity, you know what annuities are in general. It's a product that's offered by an insurance company, or it may be a private annuity with an individual. And you give money, and they agree to pay you monthly or quarterly or annual income based on what the contract says. Most annuities will be improper. Most annuities will be counted as countable resources that you have to liquidate and use to pay for long-term care, except something called a safe harbor annuity. When I said that the look-back period was extended from 3 years to 5 years in 2005, there were other things that were done in 2005 by Congress. Prior to 2005, a lot of annuities had been used by planning professionals to preserve assets. Congress said, no, there's been abuse in that, so we will allow only one type of annuity. It has to meet certain requirements. In 2005, Congress passed the Deficit Reduction Act. We call that the DRA. DRA 2005. And they said the only annuities henceforth that will be acceptable will be the ones that we define as having certain restrictions. There are almost no companies out there offering DRA compliant annuities. There's a couple. I work with one as a strategic partner, and they offer them. They're called safe harbor annuities. They meet all the requirements and regulations. And if you use this either in a married couple situation or in an unmarried couple, and an unmarried applicant, you have the ability to preserve some assets. We can do strategic gifting or divestment strategies, fancy terms. We may decide to gift some of the assets to children. Again, knowing that's going to trigger a penalty period, but our plan is to know how to pay for it, using, for example, an annuity. That's one way of paying for it. It gets real complicated, but we're gifting and divesting you of assets, knowing how we're going to pay for a penalty period when one is triggered. We actually calculate that. Sometimes that's the only thing we can do in a crisis situation. Establishing and funding an irrevocable trust. This is going to be done in advance, in most cases, of 5 years. I showed you the big binder for our level 1 estate plan. I have another binder, which is an irrevocable trust plan. Understand that when we use a trust over here, the big binder, it has a different purpose and a different outcome than a irrevocable trust that might be used for Medicaid planning. Totally different outcomes, different strategies, different planning, different consequences. But we can utilize a trust if we have enough time. If we can put assets into an irrevocable trust, and usually we design it with creditor protection from your creditors and your kids. If you have assets that you do not necessarily need to live on, extra assets, we can move them into a trust. If we fund a trust like this, we still are subject to the 5-year look-back period. If you need to apply for benefits within 5 years of funding a trust, the state will consider that a transfer that will trigger a penalty period. But assets that go into this trust cannot be used, not the principal. If you put $100,000 in there, you cannot make distributions of that principal to mom or dad. You cannot. And they cannot be the trustees of this. Mom or dad cannot. Usually it's the kids who are the lifetime beneficiaries, and usually it's the kids who are the trustees. And there are other things. Everything I'm sharing with you is just very superficial this morning. Everything has consequences. They may have advantages, and they certainly have disadvantages if that may help us decide not to do it, or if we do it, to know what the consequences are. I like this quote. Only put off until tomorrow what you are willing to die having left undone, by Pablo Picasso. That could be involved in the Medicaid long-term care planning. It may be involved in wills or trusts or some other aspect of estate planning. There are things you can do to be proactive to protect your interests. The only guarantee that I have is if you do nothing and you have a need for long-term care, or you die and you have done nothing or become incapacitated and have done nothing to protect your assets, your spouse, or your kids, there's one thing that's going to be certain, and that is catastrophe, chaos, money going to kids and people fighting about it, and perhaps losing what you've worked so hard to protect and build over time.